Ukrainian ground forces killed 800 soldiers of Wagner's group on the Bakhmut border in close combat. About 800 Russian soldiers have been killed by Ukraine's own ground forces since Thursday, said Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. During his Tuesday evening speech, Zelensky quoted Oleksandr Syrsky, the commander of the Ukrainian ground forces, who provided an update on the Ukrainian counterattack on Russian troops earlier in the day at a meeting of the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. The grueling battle for Bakhmut appears to be reaching a tipping point, with Russian troops pushing to close off the industrial city in the eastern Donetsk region. The situation around the fortress city of Bakhmut remains tense. The Ukrainian defense forces, including the border guards, faced a numerically outnumbered Russian occupying force. Yesterday, the enemy shelled the border guard fortifications with barrels, rocket artillery, and mortars. In addition, the invaders' attacks hit civilian infrastructure, causing the city to suffer significant damage. In addition, during the day, the border units conducted two positional battles with Russian attacks. Mortar calculations with the help of aerial reconnaissance inflicted fire damage along the route of the enemy's transition to the offensive. In the close zone, our defenders exchanged fire and destroyed the invaders with grenades. The enemy was stopped by Ukrainian ground forces on the defensive line. The attackers lost about 750 people killed, and 50 were injured. Nevertheless, the situation on the front line in eastern Ukraine has become tougher, President Volodymyr Zelensky said on February 1st as Russian forces pressed ahead with efforts on the ground to capture towns and cities in the Donetsk region while continuing airstrikes against other locations. The General Staff of Ukraine's military said in its daily report early on February 1st that the enemy has not paused its offensive actions in the Lyman and Bakhmut directions in the eastern region of Donetsk. Russia also kept pressing its attacks on the town of Volodar, some 150 kilometers southeast of the fighting in and around Bakhmut, which has been the focal point of the months-long battle in Donetsk. A definite increase has been noted in the offensive operations of the occupiers on the front in the east of our country. The situation has become tougher, Zelensky said in his evening video address. Zelensky said the Russians were trying to make gains that they could show on the first anniversary of the war on February 24th. Despite the statements of the Ukrainian military that the situation in Bakhmut is under control, Western experts note that the noose on Bakhmut has almost completely tightened. Any counterattack actions by the armed forces of Ukraine are completely useless here. The city will be surrounded within a few weeks or even days. Russian troops on Tuesday continued their operation to encircle and take the city of Bakhmut, where the commander of the Ukrainian ground forces called the situation extremely tense. In the Bakhmut area, Russian troops, including mercenaries from the Wagner Group, are trying to cut the supply lines of Ukrainian troops and force them to surrender or retreat. At the same time, it is known that additional troops were transferred to Bakhmut, which may indicate that the armed forces of Ukraine will try to fight for Bakhmut both directly in the surrounding city and from the western direction. However, given the serious grouping of Russian troops, the armed forces of Ukraine are unlikely to take such steps. Meanwhile, the armed forces of Ukraine began to use a new tactic. They mined the failed foreign military equipment. Russian war correspondent Yuri Kotnak said that an extremely unpleasant incident occurred near Avdiivka. As follows from the data presented, the Ukrainian military, and most likely foreign mercenaries, mined the damaged Polish armored personnel carrier and blew it up when Russian military personnel tried to capture it as a trophy. Similar tactics were previously recorded for several units of the Russian forces when Russian military personnel twice mined MTLBs and blew them up surrounded by Ukrainian military personnel. Meanwhile, fierce battles raged outside Bakhmut as Russian forces pushed their advance on the eastern city with heavy shelling and infantry attacks, Ukraine's presidential office said Monday, with at least 5 civilians killed and as many wounded in action across the war-torn country in the last 24 hours. The office of President Volodymyr Zelensky said the situation in Bakhmut's northern suburb of Pereskovivka is difficult as Russian forces continue to pummel the area with intense shelling and storming actions. The nearby town of Volodar is also under heavy bombardment. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, in an update on the conflict on Tuesday, said Bakhmut remains one of Russia's main focuses. Earlier, Ukraine's military said Russia had strengthened its forces in near Bakhmut and was shelling settlements around the city. Bakhmut, which had a pre-war population of 70,000, is a shadow of its former self. Earlier this month, Pavlo Kyrylenko, governor of the Donetsk region, said that just 5,000 civilians, including 140 children, remained in the war-ravaged city. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has vowed to protect Bakhmut, saying it's important to hold on to the city, but not at any cost. It's not a particularly big city. Like many others in the Donbass devastated by the Russians. It is important for us to protect it, but not at any cost so that everyone dies. We will fight as long as it makes sense, Zelensky said last week. We are resisting, and in the meantime, we are preparing the next counteroffensive. Zelensky said that if Russian troops are successful in capturing Bakhmut, they will want to continue their offensive in Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, up to the borders of Donbass and to the Dnieper, if they can. Many analysts say Bakhmut holds little value itself in strategic terms, but believe Russia will use the city as a stepping stone toward its goal of capturing the entire Donbass region.
Миномет! Пострел! Пострел!